vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweat working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take all the way to sprinklers on, alright. Well,
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you. He rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to the Drafting the Circuits program. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about a big weekend of racing. In the studio with me is my NASCAR guru, Gray Warren, my IndyCar expert, Joey Barnes, my F1 guy in the trenches, Richard Youden, and my Junior Series NASCAR expert, Seth Eggert. How is everybody doing tonight?
Terrific.
Good.
We got a big weekend of racing to talk about. IndyCar made their debut at COTA. We have the first new winner in IndyCar since 2016 and also the youngest winner in IndyCar history. So we have Colton Herta taking the win there, and NASCAR was in Martinsville, and we had Brad Keselowski put on a very dominating performance, taking his second win of the season, the third win for Penske Racing, with three different type tracks, three different aero packages, showing that Team Penske is probably going to be the early team to beat this year. So, but let's talk about this IndyCar race. Now, Joey, you spent your weekend down in Austin, huh? How was it?
It was awesome. It was still kind of the pinch me moment having IndyCars at a place that I've watched F1 run on for years and years. So, yeah, it was a really good experience. It was cool to see the quality of racing. I thought that we had a really good show on Sunday. The racing was good. The battles were tight, not just in IndyCar, but Indy Lights as well. And, in the end, like you just alluded to, I mean, we got to see the youngest winner in IndyCar history with Colton Herta. And, it was incredible to see that kind of scene too, not just from that impact from him and his father, but also the team, because we brought in George Steinbrenner IV as an IndyCar race winning owner. So, it was a great weekend.
Yeah, he's also the youngest Indy team owner to win a race as well.
Yeah.
So, you got this big youth movement here. But, I mean, Colton Herta, right? This thing didn't fall into his lap. He was headed for a podium anyway. I mean, there's a few things that went his way with the yellow, and Will Power had some problems with the drivetrain. But the kid drove really, a heads-up approach, very mature, very focused. I'm really impressed with this young kid. And, a lot of the comments coming out from different people, even like Alex Zanardi called him out on Twitter and mentioned his maturity and his ability to go fast. So this kid's got a great career ahead of him. I hope he's not peaking too early. But, watching him drive, what are your thoughts on this young guy? We knew he was great in the Junior Series.
Yeah, I mean, this rookie class in general is ridiculous. I mean, the talent level from top to bottom, even with a part-time driver like Patricio Ward, who won the Indy Lights title last year, beating Colton Herta. Just the quality of talent. It would be easy to look at this rookie class and look at the IndyCar schedule and say that three of these guys could win this year. And it could be any of the three. One already did. So, it's impressive talking to Colton. A lot of it just comes down to just his growth. I mean, there was a point in his life where he didn't necessarily know with his racecraft if this is a career path he could do. And then he goes to Europe for a little bit, runs 30-some-odd races with Carlin in the junior formula categories, comes back here when George Steinbrenner IV and Michael Andretti get together to do a partnership for the car that would compile with the rest of the Andretti Autosport gang. And Colton was driving it, and in 2 years became runner-up, won a lot of races, comes into this situation, and it's just incredible. I don't think it's just his racecraft that's incredible, but also, like, in order to have what he's been able to achieve so far, because he's got, 2 top 10 finishes now and 3 starts, the most recent obviously being the win in the podium. He almost got the pole, if not for maybe running an odd sequence of laps in the final round of qualifying. He could have very easily upset Will Power for the pole. So a lot of it I look at comes down to his feedback quality. He's got Nathan O'Rourke, Marco Andretti's engineer, last year actually on the pit box for Colton. So it was good to see how that has just really gelled so quickly. And I don't want to oversell this too much, because I'm very cautious about generation drivers. And how I mean that is, Graham Rahal came in and won instantly. Marco won in his first season, and Marco Andretti won in his first season. And you look at what they've done since, and those two drivers have combined to win 8 races, which, they're damn good drivers in their own right. They're very consistent, but at the same time, they're not Will Power, Scott Dixon. They're not the enigmas that were their fathers, so to speak. Colton's dad was a really good driver, but maybe not necessarily an enigma. So maybe Colton is that enigma in that respect from the family. So I'm very interested to see where the standard goes from here with Colton. Time will tell. I think he'll get on well at road courses, but his first oval is going to be Indy, and we all know that that's kind of the trick. You got to get to learn that place pretty quickly, or it's going to be a hard one for you.
Yeah, so let's talk about the other rookie that was pretty impressive, which would be Pato O'Ward. Now, we've seen, the Carlin team with one entire season behind them with Charlie Kimball and Chilton. And then this year, they haven't done much more. And suddenly, Pato's up there running in the top 10, going, wheel to wheel with guys like Graham Rahal, and just, putting on a great show. It's unbelievable that, when you got guys with experience like Chilton and Kimball in there, that they're being outshone by this young kid he's up the level of that team in my mind anyway.
What was incredible? You talk about the Graham Rahal pass, and it had everybody's attention this weekend, I think. I mean, that's a pass of the year candidate in my book. Everybody was making the moves going either into turn 1 or into turn 12 after that long back straight, trying to just outbreak somebody going into 12. Where Pato set this move up was actually going into that little bus stop section at the very first bit before the double apex right-hander around the tower. So, was it 17, 18 complex heading into 19, the penultimate corner? And the fact that he was able to pull that off in such a low-speed area and get to power so quickly, and actually Graham had almost a full car length on the inside part of that. So for Pato to find that pace and to be able to just hang it out there on the outside of that double apex right-hander was incredible. And, if you can pull alongside through that, you're going to have the preferred line going into 19 like Pato did. I mean, that was an incredibly brave move. It was an awesome move. And I think that, it's stuff like that we got to see at COTA, and later, as we learned with the caution, the only caution we had in the whole race was when James Hinchcliffe and Felix Rosenquist tried to do kind of that same thing, and it ended up not working out. Going through 19, I think we saw James Hinchcliffe just barely scrape the edge of the track, right where you'd have the bumps, and it got the car to carry a little bit too much momentum to the right, hooked Felix, and put him in the fence. And it just shows that there's a different level of driver there in terms of just what Pato was able to do with that one move on Graham versus maybe what other drivers were really that comfortable with. Because I don't necessarily think that's a position that James was too comfortable with. But, you got, at that time, what was it, lap 43? You got 17 laps to go from the end, trying to go for all you had, because quite frankly, we hadn't really seen a lot of close-knit stuff towards the front end of the grid, but everybody from behind, from like, what was that, 5th on back, was just absolutely fighting for every bit of it.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, speaking of turn 19, now COTA is traditionally a Formula One venue. They've been hosting Formula One races there since 2011. And Richard, you watched all of those, and we've all watched all of those. Now, the IndyCar series decided to lift the track limit on turn 19 simply because guys just couldn't seem to keep it on the track there. They figured they would either be writing out, 10, 12 penalties per lap, or they just, okay, guys, just do what you want. We don't care. That was, came with some really mixed reactions from both the drivers and fans on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So, Richard, what are your thoughts on the lifting the track limits on turn 19?
Well, I'm a little bit old school, I guess, when it comes to the sort of the concept of track limits. At the end of the day, my opinion is that if you have to go off the track, you're not, that's not the right thing to do. You need to, you need to stick to the limits that the circuit designers have put there. Back in the day, in Formula One races and IndyCar races, I'm sure in the 80s and 90s, you didn't have vast oceans of asphalt to run off on. You basically have, the same amount of grip as you have on the track. You'd have grass or gravel or sand or
trees.
Yes, or hay bales or people or something like that to slow you down. So I think that they need to. I'd like to see, if you're not going to put, gravel traps or a real retardant there, put these sausage curbs, whatever they like to call them, out there. I really do think it's a poor show when they're having to resort to those extremes. And I mean, they weren't just running a couple of wheels off; they were 3 or 4 car widths, wide. I mean, the first time I saw it on one of the practice sessions, I genuinely thought, "Oh, he's gone off." Oh no, they're all doing it. It's like, well, why bother tarmacking that part of the track if you're just going to use the runoff? I thought it was very, very poor, and I thought it was a very bad idea, and they need to do something about that next time. Stick a giant curb there, sort it out. Not good enough in my book.
All right, Joey, what are your thoughts on this?
So traditionally, I've always agreed with the fact that track limits are you need them enforced, and I'm very much on the kind of the personal thought that if you can have a car over those curbs and onto where it's the track limits, but not a full car width. Like if you have even the slightest gray area between the tires and the curb, I think that should be a penalty. That's the traditionalist in me. So from that standpoint, I agree with Richard. But to play devil's advocate in a situation, I think when you look at testing and the fact that so many guys were off and they were citing, hundreds of violations at that point, which meant that a lot of these teams were losing, 5 minutes of track time here, 5 minutes of track time there because they had to come in and serve just that 5-minute penalty, which got a little ridiculous. And so from that standpoint, it was being policed at the test, and it was just one of those that maybe you look at this situation and you think, as a sanctioning body, this is my thought process of what maybe they were thinking, is the fact that we're coming to a brand new track, a brand new market with brand new fans. And you don't want to run into a situation where you've got Will Power fighting for the lead, sitting on pole and just starts yarding everybody. But because he goes way off on 19, they penalize him. And then he's coming in and serving, and you don't necessarily know why. And if you had that happen to the entire 24-car field, there would be a complete cluster, and you'd have confusion among the fan base. And so brand new fans wouldn't quite grasp that. I have, from what I've been kind of told and the way things have gathered, I believe that this is going to be a little bit more enforced next year. I think this was mostly to kind of cater to the new market, the new track, and the new audience, because, I mean, those are the kind of things that you have to at least slightly expect. They tested it in February. It didn't quite work out the way that they were hoping it would, and I think that maybe we're going to have a little bit of a stricter policy to just bring it in a little bit more next year.
I mean, I think it's... Sorry, very quick point. As you say, obviously, they tested there, in February, wasn't it? And they were doing, they were running wide there and using that runoff and all that sort of stuff. So, from the organisation's point of view, they've had, 6 weeks to find a fix? They could have done something physically. As I say, stick those sausage curbs like they did in Singapore out there.
Well,
all you need is a few drills and bolts. I mean, most other tracks in the world seem to be able to do it.
Yeah, but you're running into a situation where it's an FIA sanctioned track, and I think for something like that, you would definitely need the FIA to be a little bit more involved on that. I mean, this felt like it was a situation where we had an opportunity as a series to go there, but it's like you can play, but you can't mess with, if that makes any sense. Like, you can't make alterations. You're already running the full F1 circuit, but you can't go in there because if you're talking about drilling stuff, then you're going to run into a situation where you're probably going to upset some of the F1 people whenever they come out there.
Well, yeah, and plus they run motorcycles there too, and those sausage curbs are not very kind to motorcycles.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. You can take them in and out pretty easily. It's not a permanent fix. And, I know what you're saying in the terms that, they want to go there. But as much as penalising people going across would have confused fans, also it confused fans to see cars running 50 foot off track.
Trust me, I'm right there with you. I'll say this. In testing, it didn't look like they were off to this egregious of an amount. Like when testing happened, you were off half a car length, usually a full car length at most. They weren't out there really pushing. And the thing is like even Newgarden said, like, you can go out there and you could really crank out some good time to gain momentum. Like, we're talking, I would be willing to bet that you could probably gain 0.3, maybe even 5 up to half a second if you hit it just perfect. I personally, for my own personal benefit, would like to see that a lot stricter next year.
Yeah. I
understand the reason behind why not to. I don't necessarily, I'm sure a lot of the longtime fans are like, what the hell's going on here? But, for the new fans, if that's what it takes to introduce some people before we kind of maybe bring it in another, 2 car lengths next year, car widths, I'm all for it. I mean, it's the first try. It still turned into a really good race.
I agree. Yeah, hundreds of penalties. Hundreds of penalties would have destroyed destroyed the whole show. So,
but I mean, if they'd been invited to Monaco, would they have asked to fill in the harbour because they couldn't make a corner?
I tell you this, I don't.
Now, Richard.
Yeah, I mean,
calm down.
No. I mean, he's not. But I mean,
here's my question to you both. Is it because the Formula One cars are so much better planted that they don't have the issues with that corner? They're able to take that corner at a high speed. But not quite. I don't see the Formula One cars going way out there, or is it just the fact that once they said no track limits, they're like, woohoo, let's go way out there.
Look, if you can run an F1 car around the double apex around the tower can run flat out. These Indy cars could go around that tower and just barely crack the throttle.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily. If you can go around that corner, I think you could go around 19. It really just comes down to discipline and how much you really want to push that limit. I mean, that's really all it comes down to. It doesn't come down to downforce levels or anything else. It just, if it's enforced, the guys will have to adjust accordingly, or they'll get penalized. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So if you can make that sweeping right-hander, I think you have no problems with 19.
Absolutely. Now, Gray, Seth, did you guys get a chance to watch the IndyCars at Austin? Do you want to chime in with any comments at all?
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good race. I watched some of it, bits and pieces of it, and just like I said, Herta did a great job. I mean, he was, like you said, probably headed to a podium regardless, but and they had the unfortunate caution, and of course, kind of took first and second place guys kind of out of it. But I mean, he deserved it. I mean, great run for the kid.
Just listening to the track limit debate, I can't help but think of the yellow line rule at Daytona and Talladega. Maybe if we called that track limits instead of the yellow line rule, maybe less people would be upset, but I digress.
Yeah. So the one thing I do want to mention, Will Power was, again, visibly upset with the fact that the pits are closed on the yellow. Now, this has been an IndyCar for a while. I mean, years ago, back in the 80s and 90s, if you got a yellow and hadn't pitted yet, it was an advantage. Now you're going to get stuck in the back of the pack because they closed the pits. Now, Power said this is the only series that does that, and that's not technically true. But I mean, I don't, see this going away.
Nope.
But what are your thoughts on this? Because we've seen guys Dixon get caught out. We've seen Elio get caught out. We've seen it happen to numerous guys. It's all in how you plan things. And if you try to stretch your fuel and be the last guy to pit, you put yourself in risk there. So, I mean, is there anything that can be done with this? Because I do think that at times it takes away from the show when a guy dominates, and then to the casual fan, they're like, well, why is this guy suddenly in like 9th place or 12th place? What happened? What did I miss?
But basically it just boils down to luck. I mean, you can still you can run your strategy. I mean, that's one of the things about it. Everybody's going to run a different strategy, and it can bite you at any time. You can't predict the cautions. I mean, you can do what you can sit and run all the programs on what's happened in the last 5, 6, 10 races, and when the caution is going to come out. That doesn't mean a thing, really. I mean, you can help you plan your strategy, but still, I mean, if the caution didn't come out, Power's probably sitting in victory lane.
Well, except his drive shaft.
Well, his drive shaft.
But Rossi would have been in victory lane for sure. Yeah.
Here's my thoughts on it, is the fact that just to kind of talk about Colton's pace for a second, he would have probably been slotted in with P3, maybe P2, because in the second stint of the race, he did close on Power. And I don't think that's something that we can't forget, is he was able to make moves. He was able to actually push time. It wasn't he was riding around in third. He was able to actually close on Power. So to that end, the pace was certainly there with Colton. Just that comment on there. But when it comes to this fiasco about closing the pits and what have you, this incident in particular happened at the pit entrance. So you had no choice in this case but to close the pits. And I just kind of wanted to read something out to y'all. This was, I'm going to plug myself here, but this is from the article that I wrote. Board A gave me these comments after he ended up getting himself a decent finish on Sunday. He's like, I don't know why they stayed out, talking about the leaders, to pit as late as possible, because it really wasn't hard to make it from 17 to go. A lot of them stayed out again. I guess the leaders, when you're up front, will just never learn. It always seems to be the same deal. Not much to win, but a lot to lose. So this obviously, why wouldn't you cover yourself? I think this is just a situation where Rossi and Power were just trying to stay out as long as they could, maybe to have that fresh set of tires at the end. But they were already comfortably so far out front that they thought too much maybe about, you're not going to lap the field at a 3.4-mile racetrack in this situation. So I think that they got caught up too much in that, and not necessarily enough to cover themselves. And I think it bit them. And how many times have we seen something happen where, like what Power had, he's on pit road, he's trying to launch off pit road, and he ends up breaking something. Whether it's by his doing, the car, what have you. I feel like we're averaging once a year now for the past 3 or 4 years where Power's coming in the lead and something breaks on the car exiting the pits. And, I'm sure if we look back at it, maybe that number's a little bit less, but it feels like once a year there's something where he's launching off pit road and we're breaking gears or breaking a drive shaft, or there's a sensor that's wrong. And
it's like a forced error.
Yeah, and so it just feels, I don't see the same issue out of the other guys, and I understand the need, because you're pitting under yellow, to beat Rossi, but what are you going to finish? P7, P8 after leading the first 45 laps? So, they just got bit, and Board A was talking about this. Sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. So,
but go back to if they went back to the old way where you could shoot down pit road, and you'd have other guys screaming. The opposite thing. So it would work in their favor. Things would work in their favor. But it's no clear cut answer to it.
Well, and it wouldn't have worked on Sunday anyway, because they had to close the pits because the entrance was blocked.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I've always felt like in the interest of safety, it's always a good idea to go ahead and close the pits to get the safety vehicles dispatched onto the track. So, but anyway, so we have weekend off coming up for IndyCar, and then we're on to Barber, which is always a great race. That's been the stomping ground of Joseph Newgarden the last couple of years, so that'll be exciting to see. So, Joe, any final thoughts on COTA before we start talking about the Cup cars in Martinsville?
I just kind of looking down the running order really quick, and I can't help but look at the fact, like, we had obviously that caution shook a few things up, but you know, an attaboy to Joseph Newgarden, a first and a second, opening the first two races of the season. Graham Rahal and Takuma Sato, you know, double top 10 for Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. First time they'd done that since, I think, Gateway last year, and it's the first top 5 for Graham since Detroit. So he went a while without a top 5. Obviously, Bourdais had a good finish. Marco Andretti went from 20th to 6th. We talked about Pato and P8, and Jack Harvey with back-to-back 10s after doing that in the season opener. So quietly, Meyer-Shank Racing has got themselves kind of comfortably and quietly slotted into a couple of solid runs this year. So some positives to take away from that, and it's just setting up. I think the thing that threw me off the most this weekend was Scott Dixon just looked like he was a fish out of water at times. You know, he's not one that likes to bump and rub with people, and let's be honest, this track kind of tightened up some of the spaces, especially with 12, because everybody's fighting to get that inside to set up for the outside. So I was kind of shocked to see him kind of mired back in 13th. They look like they flat out got outran strategically and by driver this weekend. So, but that's not going to stay. I mean, they're usually good for one dud a year, and then they're on it the rest of the time. So I think that everybody just saw their one dud, and I think it's game on after this.
Yeah, that was pretty uncharacteristic of Dixon. Yeah, and the other ones who've really failed to kind of impress are the Arrow Motorsports, Hinchcliffe and Ericsson both have not had the results. I mean, they've been.
I was about to say, I think that's unfair because Ericsson was running pretty damn good this weekend if it wasn't for that caution, and then he had to serve a penalty to restart at the tail of the grid with 15 to go. So. 14 to go, whatever it was. So Ericsson had a really good run going. He had a top 6 run going prior to that, and it wasn't a fluke. He charged through the field up to get that P6 run. So it was a tough break for him. I fully expect him to be pretty good at Long Beach or at Barber, and I don't necessarily know if he'll win, obviously, with Joseph doing what he's doing, but yeah. Marcus had a pretty good run. It's a shame. A lot of the guys had bad runs, but it's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes, and we're on to Barber next. So now, Gray, the Cup Series with the Martinsville, and as I alluded to earlier in the show, Brad Keselowski, 2nd win of the year, 3rd win for the Penske team. Really, not a lot of competition for Brad there. He led an obscene amount of laps.
446.
Yeah. So let's talk about it a little bit. Beyond the fact that Brad dominated the front, how did let's talk about the midfield.
Well, Penske wins the pole with Joey Logano, and of course Brad took the lead in the race shortly thereafter, and was only really challenged once during the race, and that was by Chase Elliott. And Chase briefly had the lead for few laps, and then caution came out, and of course Brad's pit crew got him back to the front, and he was able to maintain the lead to the end of the race. The 9 car showed it could be competitive with Brad and close the gap there a little bit toward the end, but a little bit too little, too late in that case, but still a strong run by Chase Elliott to come home second. But again, this is Brad's 2nd win at Martinsville in the last several years, and I think it was Logano's 4th or 5th pole there in recent memory. So yeah, the Penske cars were very, very strong at Martinsville. And like I said, there's not a whole lot to talk about other than that. Brad, pretty much ruled the day.
It was an interesting race, to say the least, though. Yes, Brad dominated it. He led the most laps, I think, since Kyle Petty led 482 or so at Rockingham in the 90s. But overall, he and Blaney were the two cars that were the class of the field as far as the Penske cars are concerned. You had Kyle Busch running well. You had Clint Bowyer running well enough that he came back from 2 speeding penalties to finish inside the top 10. And Chase Elliott, yes, he finished in the top 5. It's not only his, but it's Hendrick Motorsports' first top 5 since he won at Kansas last year. I don't know if that's a bright spot or something that Hendrick Motorsports is frowning upon, but
well,
Jimmy
Chase has been
Johnson-
Chase has been the standard bearer for that organization last year and going into this year as well.
Although I will say William Byron, it didn't look like it, but he actually did have speed. He had to start from the rear A because he went to a backup car, I believe, after a crash in the opening minutes of practice. Plus, they failed post-qualifying tech, so his time was disallowed. But the point being is he was able to get up to the top 15 or so before, unfortunately, pit stops because, again, the poor qualifying position after the time being disallowed. He just got blocked in multiple times on pit road and ultimately at one point fell a lap down. But Hendrick Motorsports, Chevy as a whole, have been struggling even still. This race, you had a little more parity, but not much. And part of that might be because the tires just didn't wear, which might have been why passing was at a premium there. If everyone was running the same speed because the tires weren't wearing and they're sliding around because the tires aren't gripping, it's hard for people to pass.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been to a lot of Martinsville races, and there's a lot of bumping and banging and moving somebody out of the way, but we just didn't see that this past weekend. And you feel like that's more
in the Cup
with
Series.
the tires than the aero?
I'd say more the tires than the aero.
Arrow's not a not at
the speeds. Yeah.
Granted, some drivers and some teams pointed to the aero, but more pointed to the tires than they did to the aero.
You know, and the thing about Martinsville, typically that you see there is cars come and go. You see what the field having an accordion effect. You'll see a guy get out, and he might blast out to a couple of second lead, and then he'll fade. Another guy will emerge up front. You didn't see that this weekend. It was pretty much a dominating performance from. You saw some cars back in mid pack do that. They would come and go and swap positions back and back. But as far as up front, Keselowski controlled that race from the get go just about.
And to quote Brad, he was on the SiriusXM NASCAR channel earlier in the week before Martinsville, and they were talking about the whole qualifying fiasco at Fontana. And Brad said that as a driver, he would love to lead every lap, qualify on the pole by 20 miles per hour, and just lap the entire field, and he would think that was an awesome race. He almost did some of that, so not that he called his shot, but he kind of implied he was calling his shot.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the qualifying procedure, right now we've got something different on the books coming up.
Yes, we do.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so from now on, if a driver impedes somebody else's lap, and this is at NASCAR's discretion, you can have your lap time disallowed. If you fail to, let me start with this. If you, there's a designated staging area at each track, and it varies from track to track. Once your car leaves that area, which is pit road, it must continue directly onto the track. You cannot stop on the pit road. If you do stop on pit road, however, there must be a lane open for competitors to enter the track. Now, the only time you can stop on pit road is if there's an incident or you've already completed one lap. And you cannot impede a competitor. If you do compete a competitor, your time will be disallowed. If you do not start a timed lap before the clock expires, you will A, have your time disallowed for that session, and B, have all of the times from the previous 2 sessions disallowed.
Okay, so now in realistic, what are we going to see on the track terms other than the print of the thing? What is that going to translate to the fans seeing in the stands? Are we going to see guys that are going to sit in their pit stall? They're going to sit in their pit stall rather than pull out onto the pit lane?
It's a good question, because if they sit in their pit stall too long, they would end up starting at the rear. Granted, at some tracks like Fontana or Atlanta, that would actually be a benefit. But at other tracks, say Texas, which has recently been repaved, Charlotte, some other tracks, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody go out and coast around the track just to have a time.
Yeah, just to save the tires till the end of the session. I understand that, but at least they're on the track and not sitting static in pit lane, giving nobody in the stands who paid money to be there a show.
And just a note on this, the reason why it's not solo qualifying. Going back to when they started this multi-car, rapid fire, however you want to call it, qualifying. It was a combination of trying to get more butts in the seats on qualifying day, and the TV partners asking NASCAR if there's a way that they could A, shorten qualifying, and B, make it more exciting to get more viewers. So a part of this is made for TV, but a part of this is also NASCAR just trying to get more fans in the stands.
Now, Joey, I have a feeling that you want to chime in on this.
I mean, I flat out hate this qualifying. It feels like when it was announced several years ago, it felt like it was them mocking F1 in some ways. I mean, and it's everything that was working, like, how do I say this very nicely? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the wheel was rolling just fine, and they tried to reinvent it, and I think they broke the wheel. So, there's nothing wrong with solo qualifying runs. I thought they were pretty straightforward. I thought it was actually more suspenseful to have it to where, when guys go out, who's it going to be? Like, I think at one point we had it to where they had the qualifying procedure inverted from practice for solo runs, which I think it was awesome. That's how IndyCar does it whenever we go to Texas. So. And
they still do that at the super speedways for Cup and tracks over 1.5 miles for truck and Xfinity.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't get why we got to have rounds, like, especially for stock cars. Like, it's a different discipline, it's a different sport. Quit trying to be something you're not. I mean, I know I rail on NASCAR a lot because, quite frankly, they just make a bunch of bonehead decisions when it comes to things. And, I mean, they've got this one wrong for a long time, and they just continue to get it wrong. So I don't know how it has to say anything else without being more negative. But I miss solo runs.
Yeah, I do too. I liked it better. The reason they went to this to try to create more people, that's to get into the stands on Fridays, wasn't because qualifying was boring. It was because people couldn't afford it. I mean, they were kind of shortening their weekend, where they used to come to the race and would arrive on Thursday and spend the whole weekend. Now they're coming to one event, and that's the Sunday event. You don't even see the crowds there for the support races on Saturday. So it wasn't the show that they were seeing in qualifying. I remember years ago when there would be huge crowds at qualifying. Charlotte Motor Speedway used to put on a spectacle for qualifying, that the whole front stretch grandstands would be full. But I mean, those days are gone. People just don't have the disposable income, to be able to do it. Everything's so expensive. Travel, lodging, different any number of things is a reason for that. And you're not, you look at the stands for qualifying. They haven't improved that, by this new qualifying procedure.
Nobody's going to follow something that doesn't have an identity, and NASCAR's still trying to figure out their identity, obviously. And I don't necessarily, maybe that's part of. I can't speak for what goes on up in Charlotte, but I know, like, growing up here in Texas, we had it to where you'd pay $15-$20 for a Friday ticket, and that would get you all a qualifying, and it would get you the truck race that night.
Right,
so
exactly, that's the way it used to be in Charlotte. They'd have a big show. You would see. They'd come and they'd have qualifying. It used to do it on Thursdays, and they'd either have a truck race that followed it, or they'd have They had the Southern Modified.
And now it's ARCA.
And now, but they did have a support show, and you got a little bit of bang for your buck. Hell, Pumpy used to even have boxing matches.
Or he'd have cars jumping through hoops of fire and stuff.
Yeah,
like that. Or somebody, a bus jumping over a bunch of
it was an event.
Junkyard cars. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. I've been there.
Having said all this negative stuff that I have a tendency to say, I will say this: I do feel like we've reached kind of the summit when it comes to where things were as far as all the bad stuff that NASCAR's gone through. Like, look at what they've had to endure over the last year. It's been a lot. Change in leadership, a change of direction, change of a lot of things, change of philosophies in some cases. So I feel like we've already reached the summit of that, and maybe this is that slow trend towards the positiveness. And if that's the case, cool, I'm all for it. But I'm one that always loves to sever things that I don't like, and this is one of those things that I don't like, and I wish that they would have severed it and gone back to the old school ways. But that said, I feel like this is going to trend more towards positiveness, but it's going to take more than just a season to get there. I think we're probably looking at a 5-year plan before we see things getting on their feet.
So, now, speaking of a 5-year plan, NASCAR has announced the Cup schedule for next season, and then this is the last season with the track agreements.
Next year is the last season.
This schedule, 2020 schedule that was just released is the last one with track agreements in place. So perhaps 2020,
there is a lot of
2021 is going to be really mixed up. But they mixed up a few things on this one. So, Seth, you want to take us through that? And Gray, you can chime in?
Well, the season opener is still going to be at Daytona, and it's still the Daytona 500. That is not changing. From Daytona, we go immediately into the West Coast swing. Vegas, Auto Club, ISM. Changing the order a little bit, because this year it was Vegas, ISM, Auto Club.
Yeah, let me inject one point in here too, and I do applaud NASCAR for this, and I have always said that running Atlanta as the second race of the season was the stupidest thing in the world, because it can be cold, bitterly cold in Atlanta, the end of February,
and it can snow
there,
and it's now the 5th race of the season,
and that makes
March
more
15th.
sense. That makes more sense because it goes back to more of an old school date for Atlanta, of course, and that's great. I think that'll help the crowds at Atlanta. That'll help.
And speaking of old school, Homestead is moving to March 22nd, which back in the beginning of the Truck Series and the mid-90s for the Xfinity Series, they would go to Homestead typically as a support race or around the same weekend as CART or IndyCar, which went to Homestead in mid-March around those time periods. Then after Homestead, it's going to be Texas, Bristol, Richmond on Sunday. It's moving from the night race to a day race. Mother's Day weekend, we'll have a night race at Martinsville Speedway.
That will be pretty much a success there. I'll say that right off the bat. That should be. People have been clamoring for a night race at at Martinsville for a long, long time. So I think I applaud that.
and
that
the weather will be beautiful in early May in Martinsville.
Yes, it will.
If
It
it doesn't
should be.
rain,
No,
if it doesn't
right,
rain,
you
but
can't
I mean,
do nothing about rain.
yeah, but they pushed to Martinsville both dates. You know, the early one back into where it's cold. So now at least they've pushed this one back into nice weather.
Yeah. So that'll
be a success.
That'll be
Now-
a plus.
And July 4th is no longer going to be at Daytona. It'll now be at Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
And let me inject a point there. That will be the most ungodly hot race that those boys will face. That is the hottest place on earth in July. You know, the first many years that we ran the Brickyard 400, we ran it in July. And in my 25 years of traveling the Cup Series, that is one of the hottest races I've ever been a part of at Indianapolis in July.
And they had moved it. Last year they moved it to the regular season finale at the end of August.
Just because of that.
Because it was actually a little bit cooler. Not much, but a little bit. Also, Pocono, it's still going to have 2 races, but it's only going to have 1 date. It will have a doubleheader with a cup race Saturday, June 27th, and Sunday, June 28th. And on top of that...
Let me interject a point on that. I've always kind of felt that Pocono's 2 cup days were too close together.
And
now they've just made them even much closer together. So
but
that'll be if they come out with like a really reasonably priced like a super ticket for both races,
or all 5.
That'll be a bang up event. Yeah, for all 5 because you've got all the support series.
Yes, you'll have the trucks, Xfinity, and ARCA there.
Yeah, but if they come up with a reasonable price point for a ticket, for 1 ticket that'll get you both races, that can be a success.
And Richard, you have a point before I continue?
Yeah. So their Saturday, Sunday race, 1 race Saturday, 1 race Sunday?
Yes.
So I guess it's too early to say, but would they qualify 2 separate qualifyings in 2 separate cars?
They haven't announced those details as of yet.
Because you'll end up with, so basically end up taking 2 haulers to each race per team, or a bit like they do on the West Coast Swing, take a hauler and then a car transporter.
I do
I don't think they'll do that. I don't think they'll do that. I think they'll probably be more like pattern after the IndyCar double headers, where you'll qualify and I think the starting field for the second race will be probably predicated on how you finish the first race.
And that's what the talk is right now, but nothing's confirmed yet. Yeah. And I will say this, this idea for a doubleheader weekend is the brainchild of the Igdalski family that owns Pocono. And they did this in anticipation because talk is the 2021 schedule will have only 28 to 30 race weekends. And Pocono, having shrunk from 2 race weekends to 1, will be able to keep intact all of their races if this goes off without a hitch. Mm-hmm. So we could see possibly more doubles in the future.
Yeah.
IndyCar tried that a couple of years ago. They had 3 or 4 double headers on the schedule. I think Toronto, Houston, Detroit.
Yeah.
Now Detroit's still a double, but those other ones have gone by the wayside. But now, Joey, you've got some thoughts on this, comparing the Pocono double to Detroit?
I don't necessarily look at the compare. I mean, obviously there is a comparison, so I'll be interested to see how it works. I don't think you can go in there and run the 400-mile races that you have been running at Pocono. I think maybe one day's a 2, like a sprint, and the other day's a 400-miler. That would be fine, or two 3s. When you got all the shows,
I've heard 2 3s, but they haven't announced the lengths yet.
Yeah, but when you have
2 3s would make more sense. But I mean, that's tough on the crews, especially if you have a big wreck on Saturday's race. These guys got to get those cars back together in a day.
Well, what they'd probably do if you were to crash your car significantly on Saturday, they'd probably allow you to start the second race with the backup car and just forfeit your starting position and start at the rear of the field.
So what happens if it rains on Saturday? And
Yeah,
it
I mean,
that day out?
that-
Do you do 2 races in a day, or do you push Saturday race to Sunday and Sunday race to Monday?
Now
I don't know.
that happened at Detroit a couple of years ago. It rained. The Saturday race got rained out, and they had 2 races on Sunday. It's absolutely what they
again,
did.
it's
They had
something
one
that
race, and 2 hours later they had the other.
But these are NASCAR drivers, you know.
I-
you can't.
Oh yeah.
I know there's a contingency plan in place already, but they haven't announced it yet.
Yeah, but where I wanted to go with this, the fact that when you have so many, no, you're good. When you have so many support series running with them that weekend, it makes no sense to try to compile all of it because you're running against daylight essentially, and with no lights around Pocono, I don't know necessarily how that's going to work and how that's going to play out. But
I believe the way I've been told anyway, by some people, it would be ARCA and Truck on Friday, with both being a one-day show, essentially. Xfinity and the first Cup race on Saturday, and then Cup as a standalone on Sunday.
Yeah, see, that sounds like 2 200-mile races on Saturday and a 400-miler on Sunday. But to kind of go where I wanted to go with this originally was the fact that they've got to – I love the idea of cutting back the schedule because I think – and F1 does this and IndyCar does this, and I think it's a beautiful thing in this day and age especially. When you cut back on the schedule, you make it to where things are more exclusive, which means that to the fans that want to go to something, it is a must-go-to. Like, you know how many times a year, because Texas has 2 dates, or Kansas, or Dover, of all places, you go there and it's like, well, if I don't make this spring date, I know I've got the fall. And if I don't get the fall, then I know that I've got, 6 more months, I've got the spring. So I like the idea that you have the situation where if this can become where they cut back with this 28 to 30 race deal that you're talking about, I like the idea that this can become more exclusive because there's more on the line if you've got to wait next year.
And just a real world example of that, growing up from 96 to 2006, we went at least once a year to Dover. The only thing that determined which race we went to was, for that particular year, which holiday fell during the summer race. Because for years, if it was Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur for us, we didn't go that weekend. So I was going to say just a real world example of that.
Yeah,
Any time you kind of make things, I get what Joy's saying, and I agree. You've got to leave the fans wanting more, and if you give them more, they're going to get complacent with it. So take a little bit back from them. Retract a little bit, and get them interested again.
Yeah, I mean,
so does anybody think that Kyle Busch should go for a 5 sweep?
Oh God.
Oh, he might, yeah. But fellas, we're coming up against our time slot of the show, and we've only got to the July part of the schedule. So, Seth, after we do the doubleheader at Pocono, what's next? We've got some changes in the playoffs.
Well, first off, right after New Hampshire, you have a 2-week break. NBC will be wherever the Olympics are for 2020. I think they're in Japan. Then after that, you have 4 races in a row: Michigan, Watkins Glen, Dover, and Daytona for the regular season finale. The playoffs begin
Is that going to be a night race?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great.
And the playoffs begin with Throwback Weekend at Darlington Raceway. Followed by
It's fantastic.
Followed by Richmond and Bristol. So you have 3 of the oldest tracks and 3 of the most difficult tracks in NASCAR to start the playoffs. Then you go out west to Vegas, you go to the Talladega Superspeedway, and then to the Charlotte Roval for the second round. After that, we have Kansas, Texas, and Martinsville to cap off the 3rd round of the playoffs. And to for the first time since 2001, ISM Raceway is the new host of the championships. In 2001, it was New Hampshire because of 9/11. Prior to that, it was Atlanta. Most recently, it's been Homestead. So we will now be crowning the champion at the favorite track of Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick.
Yep, nice. Well, I mean, other than the transporter drivers being not too thrilled with this, I do like the new the playoff races. I like the fact that Bristol is in the playoffs. I still would love to see a Watkins Glen or a Sonoma in there, but I'll take the Charlotte Roval because that was pretty darn entertaining last year.
And we end Veterans Day weekend in 2020.
Right, so we're ending a little earlier. Yep. So
Seth,
yes,
is Ford did Ford's sponsorship of championship weekend at Homestead, did that expire?
I think that this is its last season, which is one of the things that allowed this change to happen.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. Yeah.
Because Ford, if I remember correctly, about 15 years ago signed a 15-year deal.
Yeah, it's been Ford Championship weekend for a good long while.
For about 20 years or so now. So I want to say this is their last year as Ford Championship weekend. Whether or not they maybe move that sponsorship over to ISM Raceway in Phoenix or the current sponsor out there, which I believe is either ISM Connect or IK9 takes over. I don't know. That it's a little too early for that news right now. Xfinity and truck playoff or truck schedules should be out within the next week or two from what NASCAR said. And the 5-year sanctioning agreements were specifically for the Cup races. So we might see a little more drastic changes for Xfinity and truck.
So now when we're talking about the 2021, okay, you're talking about limited race weekends, okay? But there's also the thought of bringing a few new tracks on board. I know that Road America has been in discussions.
As has Rockingham, Iowa, Nashville Fairgrounds, and there's even been talk of Portland.
Yeah, so I don't see how we're going to add these tracks and reduce this unless we get a lot of these traditional tracks that have 2 dates to drop one.
There's that, and also talk of midweek racing for some, like I said, 28 to 30 race weekends. I didn't actually specifically say 28 to 30 races.
Okay. All right. So, guys, we are up against the clock here. So, where are we racing next with NASCAR?
Texas.
Okay. Joey, would you like to make a pick for Texas, since that's your home state?
Harvick.
Good pick.
It's a good pick. Yeah, it's kind of funny how Harvick really hasn't won one yet this year because usually he's strong out of the box. So, Gray, who do you like for Texas?
I was going to pick Harvick because I thought that would be a good sound pick, but I'm going to have to go and say Kyle Busch.
All right, and Seth?
Blaney.
Richard, I take it.
And the Englishman gasps.
Englishman gasps. Okay.
Let's have a think. Amarola.
All right, and I'm gonna go with Logano. So now, Richard, we're Formula One. We're in Bahrain next week.
We this weekend. Yep. No.
This coming weekend, we're in Bahrain. So let's make us a pick for Bahrain. Richard, you get the first pick.
Bottas.
Okay, and Gray, who do you like?
Vettel rebounds.
Awesome. That'd be a very popular pick. Joey?
Not necessarily wanting this, but probably Verstappen.
All right, Seth?
Lewis Hamilton.
I was going to say, nobody picked Lewis Hamilton yet, so...
probably have a floor destroyed by the time he gets to lap 3.
There'll be a little fleck of paint missing somewhere.
So who does that leave me?
Charles Leclerc.
Charles Leclerc, Pierre Gasly, one or the other,
You
right?
don't. Whoa! Is that even a contest? You're mad.
Fernando Alonso.
No?
Revoke your credentials right now. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
You
I'll
should
Leclerc,
pick Danny.
so.
Go ahead and pick Kvyat. I mean, he's got a better chance than Gasly.
I've always liked Kvyat. Yeah, I mean that dude's pretty cool, man. He's in and out. He's like He's like the thing that wouldn't leave. You know. So,
I had one of those on my shoe the other day.
But I digress, guys.
It's nicer when I thought you were about to say.
Guys, it's been a great show tonight. I want to thank you, Gray, Richard, Seth, Joey. I want to thank you folks that tuned in and listened to us. I want to thank Hoobazoo Radio Network and iHeartRadio. And guys, till next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website.